In the heart of suburban Chicago, Ryan believed his life was on a well-defined path. He had a stable job as an IT consultant, a wife whom many envied, a spacious new apartment in the vibrant neighborhood of Lincoln Park, and even a seemingly harmonious relationship with his mother-in-law, Teresa. In her early 50s, Teresa carried herself with an effortless elegance, her presence commanding attention the moment she entered a room. There was a composed calmness about her, yet an undeniable strength that filled the space around her. Ryan had never truly examined his life until that fateful evening. His wife, Claire, worked as a project manager at a communications agency, and as was customary on Fridays, she texted him to say she would be working late. Nothing unusual there. He settled onto the couch, ordered a pizza, and opened her laptop to watch a show. It was her account he accessed, not his, since her logins were saved, making it more convenient. As he opened the browser, a message notification popped up, catching his eye. "Kitten, your eyes today have destroyed me. I don't know how to resist you." His heart skipped a beat. He froze for a moment, then, compelled by an invisible force, clicked on the chat. The screen filled with messages, flirtatious banter, provocative photos, hearts, and promises that had nothing to do with him. It felt like a distorted dream, yet every word was real, undeniable. Claire had been unfaithful, and not just recently, the conversation had been ongoing for months. He closed the laptop, the pizza arriving moments later, untouched. Sitting in the dim light of the living room, he struggled to process what he had just discovered. The pain was dull yet intensifying, like a persistent ache that refused to fade. Humiliation, anger, disbelief, he had built everything on a foundation of trust that had shattered in seconds. Then the doorbell rang. He rose mechanically and opened the door to find Teresa standing there. It was rare for her to visit unannounced, especially in the evening. She wore a fitted navy dress that accentuated her figure, her hair cascading over her shoulders, and the scent of citrus and amber she wore felt too intense for a casual visit. "Is Claire not back yet?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of concern. "No, she's still at the office," he replied quietly. Without hesitation, she stepped inside, placing her bag on the entryway table. She scrutinized him closely. "Are you okay, Ryan?" Her voice was soft, yet there was an undercurrent of tension. He hesitated, then, without thinking too much, confessed, "Claire is cheating on me." She fell silent, as if those words were something she had already heard in her mind countless times. Closing her eyes for a brief moment, she nodded slowly. "I suspected it for a while," she said softly. "But I hoped I was wrong." "Did you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure," she replied, her expression shifting. For the first time, he noticed something different about her. She was no longer the formal, composed mother-in-law he had known. There was a veil of sadness in her eyes, but also an unexpected warmth. She took a step closer, placing her hand gently on his chest. It was a delicate gesture, so unusual that it took his breath away. "You deserve to be treated better," she said. "You need someone to remind you of your worth." He stared at her, feeling his heart race. It was wrong, he knew that. But it was as if a wall inside him had crumbled. She wasn't retreating, offering him empty platitudes. Instead, she was presenting something far more dangerous, understanding without judgment. "What are you doing, Teresa?" he asked, confusion swirling within him. "Nothing you can't stop," she replied firmly, her breath slightly quickening. Her fingers brushed lightly against his shirt. He felt disoriented, yet drawn to her. Perhaps it was the need for revenge or simply loneliness, but in that moment, she represented a refuge amidst the storm. "Do you really want this?" he asked, lowering his voice. I don't know, she admitted. I just know I don't want to see you suffer like this, and maybe I need to feel alive too. Her confession, simple yet startling, broke every restraint he had. He took her hand and squeezed it gently. No more words were necessary. The silence between them spoke volumes. Their lips met in an uncertain kiss, charged with repressed emotions. Then, suddenly, she pulled away. We should stop. If we go further, we can't go back. I don't want to go back, he said, holding her gaze. The days that followed felt surreal for Richard. Chiara, his girlfriend, continued her routine as if nothing had happened. She laughed on the phone, prepared breakfast, and kissed him on the cheek every morning. But Richard felt hollow, or worse, filled with a new, undefined sensation that gnawed at him. He didn't speak to Teresa, nor did they exchange messages, but he sensed she was thinking about that night too. He could feel it in the fleeting glances they exchanged, heavy with unspoken secrets. One evening, he made a decision. When Chiara returned home, she found his laptop open on the table. The chats were visible, laid bare for her to see. Her hands trembled as she approached the screen. Richard, I can explain, she stammered. No need, he replied coldly, standing up. I know everything, every message, every photo, every lie. Chiara's hands flew to her face, as if to hide from the truth. How long? He asked, his voice steady. I don't know, it was a mistake, she said, her eyes wide with fear. Do you know what I did while you were lying? He watched as she looked up, panic-stricken. I spent a night with your mother. The words hung in the air, and Chiara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face, and she shook her head in disbelief. You're lying? No, look at me. I'm not lying. She collapsed into a chair, her expression one of shock and disbelief. He remained standing, unyielding. The part of him that once loved her had vanished, leaving only ashes behind. Leave, she said, her voice trembling. Chiara looked at him as if she no longer recognized him. I told you to go. Without another word, she stood and walked out of the house. He was left alone with the silence, but for the first time, he had stopped lying to himself. The first week after Chiara's departure was unreal. The house was silent in a different way, not tense, but empty. Every object seemed out of place, even though nothing had been moved. He hadn't touched her things. Her slippers were still beside the bed, her scarf draped over the back of a chair, but something had irrevocably changed. That silence, as piercing as it was, felt more honest than any words they had exchanged in recent months. He didn't talk to Teresa, no messages, no calls, but she knew. He could see it in her evasive glances when they crossed paths a few days later in the stairwell of their apartment building. She had come to collect some of Chiara's belongings. I'll go up alone, don't worry, she said, her voice steady. He nodded, unable to find his voice. The sound of her footsteps echoed above him, clear and deliberate. Then, suddenly, they stopped, and for a few seconds, there was silence. A moment later, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Teresa standing there, her gaze unwavering. She held a small canvas bag, likely filled with her daughter's personal items, but she didn't lift it or show it to him. They stood there, staring at each other for a few moments. Can I come in? She asked softly. He stepped back, allowing her to enter. She said nothing as she placed the bag on the entryway table and turned to face him. I'm not here to apologize, she said firmly. I don't have that right. He studied her. She seemed more fragile yet somehow more resolute. Her eyes, usually calm and cool, were now filled with something new, hesitation, perhaps even fear. I don't want to complicate your life, she continued. But since that night, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. He settled onto the armrest of the couch, feeling an unusual calm wash over him, as if the storm had passed, leaving behind a still sea. I think about it too, he admitted. Too often. She took a few steps into the room, her movements slow and measured, as if afraid to make a wrong move. Do you think it was a mistake? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He remained silent, the question hanging in the air like a droplet on glass. Finally, he replied, I think it was real, and not everything that's real is a mistake. Teresa closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Chiara called me. She says she hates you. I know, he replied, feeling the weight of her words. She says you ruined her life. She ruined ours first, he said, the bitterness creeping into his voice. Teresa moved closer, and his heart raced. Each time she was near, he felt that subtle, electric tension, as if the room was closing in around them. And you, Richard? She whispered. What do you want now? It was a difficult question. What did he truly want? Revenge? No, not anymore. A second chance? Perhaps. But with whom? With Teresa. He didn't have clear answers, only an impulse. And he followed it. He stood up and stepped toward her, taking her hands in his. They were cold, or perhaps he was just warm. They looked at each other, as if they had shed every role they had played, mother-in-law, son-in-law, wife, husband. They were just two people who had lost something and were searching for each other in the dark. I don't know where we're going, he said, but I know I don't want to go back. She nodded, a small gesture filled with meaning. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sipping tea, gazing at each other, their fingers brushing together without them even realizing it. There was nothing grand about it, but every glance was a promise they dared not voice aloud. A few days later, Teresa texted him. Can I come talk to you? I don't want to leave things hanging. He replied, whenever you want, and she arrived in the late afternoon. She wore a light coat and a thin scarf, her eyes marked by a slight unease. It's only been 10 days, she said as she stepped inside. And yet it feels like an eternity. I know. I've thought about everything, about Chiara, about you, about me. We can't pretend this didn't happen. We've crossed a line. She nodded. Richard, I'm not a girl. I know how to recognize an impulse from something deeper. He moved closer, his heart racing. And what do you feel? That I can't get you out of my mind. His breath caught in his throat. Then don't, he said. They kissed again, but this time without anger, without desperation. There was sweetness, a need to be seen, to belong. Her face nestled against his neck, his breath mingling with her hair. It felt as if two castaways had clung to each other on a deserted island. After that day, they met discreetly several times, always at his place. Teresa would say she needed to run errands or pick up some things from Chiara, but they both knew those were just excuses, and he felt no guilt. Chiara was no longer part of his life, not really. And Teresa? Teresa had become a constant in that sea of uncertainties. Then one afternoon, Chiara returned, not to stay, but to collect her last belongings. Teresa was there with him at that moment. They were sitting at the table, drinking coffee, when the sound of keys in the lock froze them. Chiara entered and saw them, standing still, her gaze fixed first on her mother, then on him. No words, no screams, just silence. Then, quietly, she said, I knew it. Teresa stood up. Chiara, don't talk. Mom, please, I just want to explain. There's nothing to explain. It's perfect as it is. At least now I know where I inherited the ability to betray. Those words landed like a slap. But Teresa didn't react. He stood up and said, "If you came to get your things, I'll help you. I don't need anything from you." Chiara left 10 minutes later. Teresa stood there, silent, before slowly sitting down. "I've hurt her irreparably," she said. "She did that to me first," he replied. "But I'm her mother, and I was her husband." They sat there, staring at the empty coffee cup on the table. The past was behind them, but the future was no longer in anyone's hands. The day after the scene with Chiara, the house felt quieter than usual, but it wasn't the restless silence of previous days. It was a heavy silence, like the stillness that follows a storm. Teresa didn't sleep over that night. She simply said, "It's better if I go home." He couldn't insist. He knew she needed time to herself, to think, to face the fact that her daughter had seen them together and that nothing would ever be normal again. He spent the night in the kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold between his hands, staring out the window. The city seemed frozen. Occasionally, the sound of a car broke the silence, but inside him, it felt as if time had stopped. He no longer knew what to expect from this story. He had stepped out of a facade, a marriage built on lies, only to enter another reality just as fragile, filled with questions. The next day, Teresa sent him a simple text. "I'm okay. We'll talk soon." He read it and didn't reply immediately. He didn't know what to say. He didn't even know what he wanted from her or from himself. 3 days passed without them seeing each other. Then one morning, the doorbell rang. It was her, wearing jeans and a light sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She didn't look like the elegant, decisive woman he knew, she seemed more real, more tired. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She stepped inside and paused in the hallway, as if reluctant to venture further. "Chiara hasn't spoken to me since," she said immediately, without preamble. "I tried, but she blocked me on everything." The day after the confrontation with Chiara, the house felt eerily quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It was heavy, like the stillness that follows a storm. Teresa didn't stay over that night. "It's better if I go home," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. He couldn't argue with her. He understood she needed space to process everything, especially the fact that her daughter had witnessed their moment together. He spent the night in the kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold in his hands as he stared out the window, lost in thought. The city outside seemed frozen in time. Occasionally, the sound of a car would break the stillness, but inside him, it felt as if the world had stopped. He was no longer sure what to expect from their situation. He had stepped away from a facade, a marriage built on lies, only to find himself in another fragile reality filled with uncertainty. The next day, Teresa sent him a simple text, "I'm okay. We'll talk soon." He read it but didn't reply right away. He wasn't sure what to say or what he wanted from her or himself. 3 days passed without any contact. Then one morning, the doorbell rang. It was Teresa, dressed in a pair of faded jeans and a light gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, no makeup on her face. She looked different, more vulnerable, more real. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," he replied, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated in the hallway, as if the weight of their situation was holding her back. "Chiara hasn't spoken to me since," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I tried reaching out, but she blocked me on everything." "I'm sorry," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I really am." It pained him to see a mother and daughter's bond unraveling like this. I don't know if I'll ever be able to get her back, Teresa continued, her voice trembling. And a part of me feels like I won't see her for a long time. It's not your fault, he replied gently. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But that's not the point. She turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The point is, what have we become? She asked, her voice cracking. It was a question he had been grappling with for days. What were they really? A moment of mutual comfort? A rebellion against loneliness? A mistake? A coincidence? Or something neither of them wanted to admit? I don't know, Teresa, he admitted honestly. But I know I can't pretend nothing happened. She took a step closer, her expression earnest. Neither can I. So what do we do now? I don't want to lose you too, she said, her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't expected that. Teresa wasn't the type to make declarations of feelings. Yet there she stood, looking more fragile than he had ever seen her. He reached for her hands, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. Maybe we don't know where we're headed, he said softly. But we can try. A timid smile broke across her face as she lowered her gaze. I'd like that. They embraced, a long, silent hug filled with everything they couldn't articulate. From that day on, things began to change, slowly but steadily. They started seeing each other regularly, not every day, but often enough to make it clear this was no longer just a fleeting affair. Sometimes they would drive out of the neighborhood, far from prying eyes. Once, they visited a small park outside the city, sitting on a bench beneath a vibrant maple tree, watching the leaves fall like confetti around them. Teresa rarely spoke about Chiara, and he didn't press her. He knew it was an open wound. Instead, they shared stories of their pasts, her youthful dreams, the books she loved, the music that shaped her. She talked about who she was before motherhood, before becoming someone's mother-in-law. He shared tales of his work, the mundane clients he dealt with, and his long-lost dreams of writing. She would smile at his sarcastic remarks and laugh at his daily misadventures. There was a lightness between them, but also something deeper, an understanding that transcended words. One evening, after they had cooked together, they found themselves on the couch, the television flickering in the background, but neither of them was watching. Her head rested on his shoulder. If anyone found out about us, they would judge us harshly, she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. I know. They'd call us selfish, irresponsible, wrong. And what would you say? He asked, his heart racing. He fell silent, contemplating her question. I'd say we're two people who have suffered and found each other, he finally replied. She closed her eyes, absorbing his words. You realize if this ever got out, people wouldn't see the truth? It doesn't matter, he whispered. I don't want to live for others. Neither do I, she murmured, though her voice trembled. But sometimes when I wake up at night, I'm scared. Scared of losing everything. Even you? He cupped her face in his hands, looking deep into her eyes. You won't lose me, Teresa, not now. But they both knew their little world could crumble at any moment. Just one look from Chiara could shake everything. One day, while they were grocery shopping at a store outside town, he noticed Teresa freeze in front of the bakery section. A man was staring at her, someone who looked familiar, maybe a colleague from school or a neighbor. She grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. Let's go. Now. When they got back to the car, she was tense. Ricardo, we need to be more careful. Of course. But we can't live in hiding. I know, but I'm not ready, she replied, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. A few nights later, while they were having dinner at his place, the doorbell rang. Teresa and he exchanged glances, both surprised since they weren't expecting anyone. He stood up and answered the door. "Ricardo, it's Chiara," came the voice from the other side. His heart dropped. Teresa stood up, her face pale. "What do we do?" she whispered, panic in her eyes. He looked into her eyes, searching for strength. "We open the door." With a knot in his throat, he opened the door. Chiara stood there in the hallway, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry or upset, she was calm, but there was an unsettling tension beneath her composed facade. The light from the hallway flickered, making the moment feel surreal. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice steady. He didn't respond immediately, stepping aside to let her cross the threshold. Teresa remained frozen, her heart racing as the reality of their situation began to unfold. Teresa stood rigidly by the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. When Chiara saw her, she halted, the air thick with tension, as if the room had lost its oxygen. "I didn't come here to fight," Chiara finally said, directing her words toward her mother. "Then why are you here?" Teresa replied, her voice calm but edged with concern. Chiara hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. "I can't sleep. I see you both everywhere, in every room, in every gesture. I wonder if I started all of this or if you two were just waiting for an excuse." Those words struck like a thunderclap. Teresa took a step forward, but Ricardo gently grasped her arm, signaling her to hold on. "Chiara," he said softly, "it wasn't us who lied. We didn't initiate this fracture." She shook her head, her expression a mix of pain and understanding. "I know. That's what hurts more. If you had hated me, it would have been easier. But the fact that you found comfort in each other, that something grew between you, is what I can't forgive." "You don't have to forgive if you don't want to," Teresa said, her voice steady. "But you need to know it wasn't a game. It wasn't a whim. It happened, and none of us expected it." Chiara closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, locking her gaze onto Ricardo's. "Did you ever love her, Ricardo? Really?" He paused, caught off guard. He could have lied, could have said it was just a mistake, just pain. But something within him resisted returning to that pretense. "I don't know yet," he replied quietly. "But I know that with her, I didn't have to pretend." It was as if a crack opened in Chiara's eyes. She didn't cry, but she sank onto the couch, suddenly empty. Teresa remained standing, then, after a long silence, moved closer. "I never wanted to take anything from you," she said softly, "but I discovered that for once in my life, I wanted to be chosen. Not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a spectator, but as a woman." Chiara let out a bitter, thin laugh. "And you were chosen, beautifully." She stood up, heading toward the door, but paused. "I won't come back." "Not to you," she said, looking at Ricardo, "nor to you," she added, turning to her mother. "You're free, but don't expect to build something on this pain." After that night, it took time before Teresa and Ricardo truly spoke again. They continued to see each other, but with caution. A new, deeper tension lingered between them, as if reality was finally demanding they face it. One Sunday afternoon, while walking along the river in their town, they sat on a wooden bench beneath the yellowing trees. "Do you think she was right?" Teresa asked. "In what way?" he replied. "That we can't build anything on what happened." He pondered for a moment. "I don't know, but I believe every story has an imperfect origin, even the best ones." She gazed at the flowing water. "What if we're just prolonging the pain? What if this is just a refuge from loneliness? Or what if it's a new beginning?" I countered, "We'll never know if we keep looking at it only through guilt." She didn't respond immediately, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm scared, Ricardo. Scared to believe, scared to be disappointed, scared to lose again. The fear doesn't go away, but we can choose whether to let it guide us or not. The following months were a slow journey. They began to engage in small, everyday gestures without hiding. Grocery shopping together, sharing a movie, cooking dinner. Teresa often returned home with a bouquet of flowers or a new book. He tried to surprise her with small new dishes or spontaneous walks. One evening during dinner, she looked into his eyes and said, "Have you ever thought about how much you and I have changed?" "Yes, but I don't know if we've changed or if we've finally become who we really are." She smiled. Maybe both. They stopped talking about Chiara, not because they wanted to forget her, but because they understood that one cannot remain forever tied to what cannot be repaired. A year later, one April evening, as they returned home under a light rain, Teresa paused in front of the door. "Ricardo, tell me, if tomorrow you said you wanted to start over alone, I would understand. But if you want to continue this journey with me, then promise me we won't live in the shadow of what was." He took her hands, warm and trembling like the first time. "I have no more shadows," he said. "Only you." They entered the house, closed the door, and sat together on the couch in the evening silence. No regrets, no rush, just two people who had weathered the storm and had chosen, despite everything, to stay. They weren't perfect, but they were sincere. And perhaps, in certain cases, that's all that matters. Subscribe to the channel,